You're listening to Life Check Yourself with life coach, transformational leader, and dating and relationship badass, Marni Battista. Every week, you'll get the raw truth from top experts and real people on the important life and love issues you want to know about. So if you're ready to life check yourself in your relationships, your career, and the areas of your life that matter most to you, and you're not afraid to be called out on your stuff, then you're ready for what's next.
Life Check Yourself with Erin Johnson. The secret to understanding why men need sex. It's not what you think. Ladies, welcome. You are going to love today's episode. I know I say that every time, but you know that I'm always right. But this one's really special. I'm excited to introduce you to Erin Johnson. He is a facilitator, public speaker, and touch specialist working to identify and interrupt barriers between people, which is just like, hits me in my heart. As the co-founder of both Holistic Resistance and Grief to Action, Erin takes the time to hold the stories of Black people around homophobia, transphobia, internalized racism, and those that are chronically undertouched. And because oppression is a part of historical and present American culture, and long-term impact of those trauma stories should be acknowledged and held as a map of our healing, Erin practices and invites various methods of moving through these stories, such as communal listening ear, sound healing, meditation, and closeness to the earth. And I am just so excited to have you here. And I wanted to know, just for you, Erin, how did you get to this work? It's so profound and so meaningful. What's your story?
Totally. Thank you so much first for having me and having this conversation. I got to this story. I think you could boil it down to being chronically untouched myself and being introduced to cow earth and native kahili and natural building. These are things that really shifted my kind of worldview in short. There are many elements in between those, but those are two really important pieces. If I didn't track those or have any acknowledgement of those two pieces, I would probably not have made the domino effect of my reality being very different than a 9-to-5 in the Mojave Desert, may or may not have even noticed what my body was doing. So I think for me, I think about that. Also, I will mention the mentorship program. I think the choice to mentor other young Black men required so much of me, because the way I mentor it evolved to basically parenting. I was in a reparenting role. So it wasn't just like hung out after school. A collection of African heritage folks moved in with me. So I provided complete care for them. And that shifts you in your early mid-20s, being a parent of a teenager in your 25 or 26, that shifts your world. It's a responsibility and their life is and you don't have the money or the therapy or all the supports you would need, and that I have much more access to now. So I think when I think about it, I can go clearly back to my father's death in 2010. I'm 41 right now. I was like going into my 30s, into my 20s, early 30s. And what was significant was I didn't cry, and his death was very painful and very tender. I didn't cry till 3 years later. Now, after my fiance at the time and wife now, I told her the story of how my father died, and she just began to weep. And when she looked at me and realized I was not feeling, I wasn't having any emotion, it was actually my father. She had never met him. She did have a lifetime of him raising, and she was weeping more than I was. She looked at me and she says, "Why aren't you crying? Like, what's up? This is up. This is a big deal." And she said, "You should look into that." And being that journey of finding my tears also led to me realizing how undercuddled, platonically touched I was. So I went on this quiet journey for 3 years of finding my own touch and finding that in such a skillful way, but also recognizing how hard it was for my positionality or my identity as a Black male, 6 foot tall, over 200 pounds, to get tender platonic touch and who would be accessible. That where is that even? Where is there a place I can go where people could see me as a human being and not be like shocked by my ask? And so that was a journey within itself. And so when it came to the place of the birth story of the Cut Project is a argument I had with the young mentee. And that argument has a story, had its own little TEDx talk that's dropped last week, but I won't go into that all right now. To say in that story, I asked one question. I said to this young man, I said, when was the last time you received 3 minutes of thoughtful platonic touch? And he couldn't think of it. It took him 15 years going back in his personal history to think of 3 minutes of thoughtful platonic touch. And that moment, if you want to see a seed be born, a light bulb go off, that moment is where I came up with the phrase chronically under touched. Did not have that language, didn't have any pedagogy around at that point. That came to me in my journaling, unpacking that conversation, and it came in my mind when he answered that question. He said, I can't think of 3 minutes of thoughtful platonic touch in the last 15 years ultimately. And that was profound. So that was it's a 7-year journey, but that was a exploding point. And that was almost 7.5 years ago when that conversation took place.
That's so amazing. Well, I just want to say like 10 things, but number one is, I think what is so profound about this is that this is a chronic problem for all people of whatever, like race, background, socioeconomic, right? Like, because we work with so many women who have these experiences when they go back and they look at experiences that they feel like, this is the first time I remember feeling left or abandoned or unimportant, right? Or that they don't feel that connection. I just really want to honor, the journey of your soul so that you could be here to start making this an important topic in our language, in our culture, and talk about that in the healing community, because the fact that one question revealed and created just a diagnosis, quote unquote, that hadn't existed is so profound. The other thing I wanted to say, I thought this was really interesting when you were speaking. I was randomly watching a new episode of Queer Eye for the Straight Guy, which is one of my favorite shows. And they went into, I think, New Orleans. And I can't remember exactly the context, but they were basically in a fraternity of these boys that were like in their 20s. And oh my gosh, what's the name of the guy who's so amazing, who's like the coach? Can't remember his name. Love him. Anyway, he gets these guys in a circle and they start talking about their feelings. And they're these 21-year-old like frat boys, right? And they're living in this home that's not taken care of. They're not taking care of themselves, etc. Anyway, and at the end, they all end up crying and they're hugging, and they all share that they'd never hugged. They'd never, they'd high five maybe, right? Like, or fist pump, right? But they'd never cried, they'd never felt, and they'd never touched in that platonic way. And it was life-changing. And they're 20-year-old young men. And so when you look at this, like, what do you think is, and for a lot of our ladies who are dating or in relationships with men that don't have access, they're like your wife and you're like, dude, why are you not feeling anything right now? How do you, if you're in relationship or someone who this sounds familiar, how do you hold space for that? And how do you support someone through that? Or how can you encourage them to do this work?
Well, it's huge. I love that question. I want to back up a little bit and just kind of mention something that's really important about those young men that had never touched before. It's a profound space. And I imagine if we go back to that house right now, they probably won't be touching. They probably go back to the default. There needs to be an intention, support for them to stay in contact. It's as important as your question you just asked now is like, if you're dating someone, if you're my fiance 11 years ago and you realize your partner is amazing, he works hard, he does the things, but he's not feeling, and you're not the person to necessarily be the caretaker of that. That's a whole lot for you to take in. You have a whole lot of things to do in a relationship that's not tending to that 30-year trauma story that your amazing potential partner is having. But I would say that there's a couple of significant things to notice. And one is that the ecosystem, almost like the gravity of masculine culture in America, and we'll take race out of it just for this moment, just put it across all men. Because I have to get them in my talks, like a lot of white men come in and be like, I know you work with black men, but I'm in there too. I'm like, you're totally here. I'm not erasing you. I'm starting with my brothers because of a lot of specific things. I'm not saying that we own this market of being under touch. This is the American problem. This is across gender, across a lot, and men oftentimes suffer the most for a variety of reasons. So if you're in that position of tracking, this is language from holistic resistance, if you're trauma tracking or noticing it happening, one of the things we sit down with men, I sit men in a circle, right? And I say, hey, let's talk about your touch plan. Where do you get your touch from? And almost 100% of the time, I'll say 95, because there's slight exceptions, we have a list of 10 things, and they only write one thing in number one. My partner, my ex-partner, that's their touch plan. And we have to fill in 9 other slots of touch. And I say to them, if we take that touch, that number one up there, that partner, wife, and move it down to number 10, not that it's undervalued, but what kind of touch can we receive from all of the places? And they go blank. They're like, I have no idea. I have no idea. My partner is supposed to do all of my touch, platonic, emotional, everything, all the time. And I'm under touch for 15 years, take that too. And first of all, I'm not separate from that. I had that same trauma story. But what I found out is we wait, 4 or 6 months into the program, and I ask the same question: what is your touch plan? And oftentimes, number one is other men, which is the strangest thing for most men to track at first, but we try and track what does it mean to actually have a nourishing, platonic, healthy, non-violent. I say laugh because we have boxing, we have wrestling, we have all these violent things, but tenderness for men with men lands in our body initially as violence. It feels like violence. And violence feels like normal. So that's one name that we have to heal that trauma story. So number one is now touch with other men. Then we had in animals and earth and ourselves, having a self-touch plan that exceeds outside of masturbation. This is something that we really talk about, tender touch, that really is tender. It's all kinds of self-touch. And by the time we get down to number 10 and our partner, the touch is so much more grounded. So I would say to a woman that is holding that trauma story is that we want to start building an invitation. I call it a nest, a space where they can start imagining, maybe even fantasizing about an entire touch plan does not include them. And now we say touch plan, touch is umbrella for grounding or singing. We say singing is touch. So you might be like, my partner's not a singer, not as a performer, as a vulnerable human act. So we have a lot of young men that we beatbox and we sing together as a part of our intimacy plan. Acapella singing, very vulnerable, right? So these are things in which I think that people can really understand that we talk about touch. Touch is happening on so many levels and oftentimes it's ignored. And part of it is allowed us to slow it down, bringing in the tenderness into our world. And in that slowdown, I think is where I find a lot of folks outside even a formal program that is coached by a touch activist or by any part of our team or myself, that on their own, just acknowledging a self-touch plan in their relationship and being aware of their bodies with some oils, oh my goodness. And then it brings so much more information so we don't show up to our partners starving. We show up balanced and excited to intake. And so therefore, consent and boundaries, all that makes more sense when we're not coming from a chronically undertouched state posture. And so for me, that's what I would recommend is that conversation of building that level of creativity. And I think it's so important because I know a lot of women will be like, oh, I'll build it for them. No, don't build it for them. Part of the healing is them fumbling it through it themselves. It's fumbling it through themselves. It's so important to practice being a good witness, but not going in and rescuing right away. This is a part of our growth. It's like, I almost parallel it to a baby chick pecking itself out of its egg. If you ever seen this before, you can watch it on YouTube. They'll jump through, but I've raised chickens and I watched them peck. It takes 6 hours oftentimes for a baby chick to just pick itself out of it. What you'll notice is the mom doesn't help. The mom hen does not help. It watches that chicken peck itself out. And when the chicken finally pops that lid and climbs out, it's exhausted.
And they just flop over.
They just flop over because they've been working for 6 hours. They're working for 6 hours, fighting for their life to come into the world. That's how baby chicks come into the world. I say that because as a partner, you'll be doing that. You'll be watching them peck themselves out of a 15-year, and you want to come in there and just crack it open, and that could disrupt the entire process. So I just want to encourage these amazing women that listen right now to track that need to help crack the eggs too soon. Don't do that. Let the process unfold. You can invite support. You can invite people or other men and other resources, but don't do it for them because that, again, will probably flip you into that space of slowing down their healing. In this context, slow is the fast.
I always say that in my tribe, the slower you go, the faster you get there. You gotta go deep. Okay, I want to talk to you also about this is so great, about how our traumas and our oppression and all of those things are stored in our body. We talk a lot about, the importance of somatic work and somatic healing. And I think that so many, and I just did a post on Facebook, which was really interesting for women about like, what if we spent more time loving our bodies rather than using exercise to beat our bodies into submission, be a certain way. And I think that as humans and as women, we are like aware of our bodies, but not in the ways in which we understand that they are a gateway to like healing, right? Or they're a gateway to seeing what our pain is. So when you're working with your tribe, why have you found that the somatic work is important? And can you just share with us this whole idea of how like what is stored in there, this trauma of oppression and privilege and all those things? I want to have that conversation
Totally.
with you.
Yeah, I feel like there's been a massive shift in the last probably 10 years is where I've already started to notice it. Maybe it was happening before then, but for me, the last 10 years where we started hearing it kind of whispers, and now it's like pretty common. People say, is it a somatic experience? Are you embodied and trauma's in the body? And it just comes up as language. But what I find is there's two things that is pretty profound about, I think, somatics. One is that it is inviting us to do work that requires more faith than we ever have had as a culture, right? So if you have a therapist that can give you a pill, or a doctor can give you a pill, and this pill goes in, your headache goes away. Or you kind of understand this is Tylenol, this is what it does biologically. When we talk about somatics, it's at a level that it's cellular, and it's also energetics, and it's also spiritual, which is we say spiritual, and we kind of can see the 1995, like hit you on the forehead and they fall on the ground and kind of thing. And people are like, I don't know if that's like what I want to do. Or I'm not saying that. What I'm saying when I say spiritual is that there's a magnetism that kind of can go outside of any kind of particular religion. I think religions are all reaching for it and notice it and even tap into it, but it's just like the magnet of being a living force. And so I say spiritual, I want to just kind of open us up more than just a religion that you study. So if you study religion and you do get hit in the forehead and fall on the ground, I'm not even saying that's even wrong or bad. I'm saying that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm referring to is that we found, and the research is continuing on this, but we found that when one is moving through trauma and they're not just talking about it, when they bring it into their body, that we have seen tremendous, I'm going to use the word healing, happen, that we have found not interrupted in maybe 90 years of a person's family lineage. So maybe someone has alcoholism in their family that's been going on for 3 or 4 generations, and it gets to them, they're like, I realize I'm either in rehab or don't want to get into the place of addiction. I want to move this through my body. They'll talk to a therapist and they'll get so far, and then they might find themselves saying, I need something that drops me into my body. And when that starts to happen, we're starting to see that, and there's so many practices, but for us, we oftentimes use natural earth, and oftentimes we call them scratch holding sessions, where we have people do versions of big shakes and big grief spaces, sound and grief moving through the body at the same time. What I mean by that is that we have oftentimes people singing, either with words or without words, in a room with people in the middle in a big release space. So someone's holding space for them, and there's a lot of big pushing or pulling or squeezing or laying on, depending on what the narrative is that we're holding, allowing them to have a wild grief release experience. And we have seen just in the 5-minute sessions, 20 years, 30 years of trauma stories being released, but also repair happening. And so we look at folks that hold trauma like slavery, African heritage bodies. There has been many somatic experiences actually modeled through us throughout Black history. We look at like our music, blues dance, and the people look at blues dance, they're like, oh, it's amazing dance. That's a somatic discharge experience of the Black body processing carnage of oppression, but it also is a dance. I just want to name that these are places where we start to tap into those narratives in our own cultural background as African heritage folks. That being said, I have seen this become part of mainstream mental health practices that I find to be one of the most profound and inspiring trends I've seen in health. And what I find, though, is that the biggest smothering of this practice really making progress is time. I find that we actually don't have a life design in America to actually take somatic healing on in its full depth. We're taking sips of it, but we don't actually have a life design. What I mean by that is, last week I had to reschedule because I had a surprise death in my community. Well, if I worked a normal 9 to 5, I call my boss and I would say, I'm sorry, I just had an immediate death in my family. Like, oh, I'm so sorry for your loss. Take 3 days off. Just take 3 days. Take 3 days. And that's gracious, supposedly, take 3 days off.
Right, exactly.
And you're supposed to take like 6 months to grieve, right? Like, you're supposed to grieve for like weeks. And none of us probably have jobs. We could take multiple weeks off to drop into grief. We'll get 3 days. My point is that just gives you an example of like, when we actually give space for a somatic experience to heal the level of carnage that actually is moving through our bodies, time is the smothering factor. So I just want to name that as people on this call that have full jobs and children and multiple partners maybe and whatever they may be holding, is that I want to just recognize that the space to have a somatic experience and where to have it at, first of all, too, like audio privacy, like as an adult, you start screaming top of your lungs, let things out. Well, your apartment complex might be calling the cops on you ASAP, rightfully so, because we aren't used to people processing. We're used to people being abused or dying. They make a kind of noise, not actually, oh, that's my neighbor just processing the death of their loved one. Right. And so for me, another thing I'll just name too is I unfortunately go to like 4 or 5 funerals a year. And I will say too, if you think of a normal funeral, it's like a casket, a congregation sitting. They might have a procession when you walk by the casket. This is a wedding where it's open casket, and you see the body and you might rub your eyes. If you want to actually set things up somatically for grief, the casket would be there, but I would have all kind of mattresses and soft places around the casket space. So when people go up to their loved one, they can just fall flat on the ground. They don't hit themselves. They can be there and flail. They can flail. They can scream. And instead of saying shh, we just make space for them. We make space for them. And that service might be an 8-hour to 10-hour service. And when they're done welling, bring them water, bring them food. This is not an American funeral I just described to you. Right. But that's actually us making space for it. This is not how we would do it here. But I'm just saying, when we talk about the somatics, we actually have a change, not just our bodies and our therapy, but the therapist's office is not near strong enough for that couch to be broken in half in that sense. Right. There needs to be pads. There needs to be, soundproof on the wall. So the point is that there's a lot more infrastructure we need to build. And I'm so encouraged that we're on the path of doing this. That's where we're heading. I feel that. So I just want to encourage that as people start to feel this experience, this very much a DNA shift, that we have to change our actual life, the structure and design how we see things audio-wise, how we see things structurally-wise, how we grieve. It's a big invitation for us to reevaluate what does it mean to make space, not for just being a good capitalist. What does it mean to be a good griever and a whole human? That doesn't always come together. There's an evaluation needed.
I love this. Oh my gosh. Okay. A couple of things I want to point out. Well, first of all, when I first started doing this work, like it was in 2006, and I went to this place called the Hoffman process. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. But there was a whole section that's what you're spending time doing. And I remember a little birdie told me sort of what goes down there. And I was like, I don't want to do that. Like that feels out of control. Yeah. I like to get it out. It feels so out of control. And I think that as this community who's listening, like we spend so much time, and I just saw the Barbie movie. We talk about like, as women, like we have to keep it all under control, right? We have to be this, but not too much of this. And so there's no time or structure to like dive into what's really underneath there that is there to unpack. And so I just really honor this movement that you're talking about towards creating spaces and the time to actually, deal with all of the stuff that we're carrying around in our bodies. So that's that. So I have an example, and I would love for you to touch on what you would say to someone. So I had a client that I was talking to recently who through the story of her life, was not able to have a child in a traditional sort of situation, but she became a single mom by choice. And so we're chatting, and she's got a lot of shame around it. And so I was like, I think there's some grieving that needs to happen for the dream that never happened. Right? The loss of what could have been. It's almost like if we want to move forward into what's possible, it's like we have to grieve what we've lost, or the idea that we've lost, or the dream that we've lost, or whatever it is. And she was like, well, what do I do with that? Like, what's the point? Right? Like it just made me sad. It makes me sad to think of that. Right? And so what would you say to someone who's like, Erin's message is like, they're like, oh, there's stuff in there, but I don't want to get that out. I don't want to grieve. Like, I'm afraid I'll be on the floor for 3 weeks and I won't be able to take care of my kids, go to work, blah, blah, blah. What do you say to someone who's like afraid of their grief?
Oh, it makes sense. I would say, welcome to the club. We're all terrified of our grief in America. And to slow down practicality, right? A single mother, or a mother that only single mother is not the heartache. It's a community that doesn't know how. As America, we have a hard time supporting people. And if you're a single mom, we have a hard time really supporting the structure, generally speaking. So I'll say first, if I wanted to give some practical advice, is I'll try and get context of actually what is your life design? How much time and space and audio privacy, like practicality, do you actually have to be a wild human being for a moment, right? And our culture, you said before, you said it so well earlier, you said, we want to keep it together. We can't just fall on the floor. We have children, responsibilities. We can't get arrested right now. I want to really respect that, because that's real. And I'm not here to just say, don't do it, live your life. The grief is worth it. No, your child needs to eat. You have to go to work. You have bills to pay. I want that to maintain itself so you have shelter. Real.
Right.
That being said, I have found that when I look at a bird build a nest, is that I look at a bird build a nest, and I went to birds a lot because I raised birds, and then we had some Muscovy ducks, and I look at them, and Muscovy ducks, what's important about them is they're excellent mothers, and they use part of their own feathers to make their nest. And a lot of birds use it, but they do out of birds that I raised, the chickens, and they use a beautiful level of their own feathers. And this is important because your grief needs your own feathers in it. As a parent, you need to take some of your own sacrifice of your own energy, your own time, your own room. You need to put your own feathers, your own sacred things into your grief container, right? It needs to be a sacred space for you, not any particular religion or whatever. If your religion is a part of that's great, but you want to make sure you can create sacred space. And sacred space, particularly around grief, includes audio privacy. You might say, Erin, what do you mean by audio privacy? What I mean by that, I remember a really amazing man named Rudy was holding space for me. He said, Erin, have you ever screamed at the top of your lungs as an adult? And I was like, at that time, I was like, yeah, and I actually hadn't. I kept thinking I had it. I actually hadn't. And I realized I hadn't because I never actually had audio privacy. I didn't. The place I lived in in close proximity to people. Every time I would yell at the top of my lungs, the cops would probably be called. And I was like, so the point is that you might say, I'm in an apartment, Erin. I don't have a place where I could find. So I recommend the car. I recommend the car.
Driving down the freeway.
The car.
My best time.
I would say park the car for the sexual grief, but I would say drive to a place. If you're near a nature space, a place where you can, cars are great audio privacy spaces. And I would say bring some nature with you. I oftentimes play balls. I carry around with me as a meditation practice. You might be stones, a stick. I had a person that would take a stick they can't break, but they would constantly try and break it every day with their hands within reason, right? So they had this own practice. They would go to their car and they would drive somewhere. The car might be a sacred place to go. If you have a friend or a family member or someone in your life that has the capacity to listen to you, I'm very clear, not fix you, not say what's wrong with you, simply listen to you and not be confused about your goodness and your greatness and your sanity. And you go to that car, drive that vehicle. They could be in the car with you, park, bring some water, and say, I just want to just notice what it might look like, not to even feel grief in my body. Oftentimes we get numb to this. We don't even feel it in our bodies. Just practice yelling.
Yeah.
Yelling properly from the stomach. What I mean by, I'm a singer too, so I always track protecting the voice. What I mean is that you don't scream from here. You want to scream, from your diaphragm. And you can find many YouTube videos on how to breathe as a singer. It's useful only because I don't want you to lose your voice. If you're a parent, you need your voice. I want you to protect this very tender place in your throat. And just, I'm not going to do all this thing on a podcast. I'm going to blow the mic out. But there's a way in which you can yell from your diaphragm for 5 minutes and take a break and notice what your body feels like, right? And after a while of that, and having a witness is important. The person you trust can put their hand on your body, ideally like skin, back of the neck, or holds your hand, skin to skin contact. And if they say anything, all I would say to them to give you is that I see you, I'm here with you. Simple phrases, not like what's wrong with you, or just simple, just giving that reminder. Sometimes when I'm yelling full throttle, I'm like, I get in the zone. I said, it's almost like a mantra thing. I need someone to name, hey, little skin contact. I'm here, Aaron. Keep going. I'm here. And you might say, grief starts to come, even if it wasn't there initially. Now, it's very practical. I want to be practical for those folks. Now, those folks have more resource. Maybe they live in nature. Maybe they already have, you can make a room. You're not in a car anymore. You can make an entire room for this. Put out incense, and it's a whole design that you can do. By some name for the, I'm reaching for the person that might live in an apartment in a bigger city that needs to drive the car out into a nature environment. That's to really work on their calendar, get their friend of it. That person's what I'm reaching for now. My point is that's a good starting point. That's a good starting point for me. It's practice, vocalize. A lot, particularly women that have kept it together, have not actually accessed their full volume of their voice. They might be pitching their voice higher unnaturally because they're trying to be in kind of shape it into the accepted part of themselves. And so I want to just encourage them to find their growl, find their tone. And it's a whole other thing to define your voice, but just notice if you are a person that's, I've talked higher because my lower voice is something I've avoided. You want to grieve in that voice that feels comfortable, not the voice that makes you feel safe in culture. That's real. That voice that is you. And I want to name that piece right there. It's just like the pre-grief experience, which is almost important as the grief itself. In some cases, more important. And so I would say if you could do that as a starting point, you might be well on your way. And some of you all, once you start this process, the grief will naturally arrive. Some of you all take more time, but that exercise itself is a good entry point into grief. Now, I would say a grief best practice is in community. Grief best practice is in community. And so I would say eventually, and I would find a grief community in which is really, depending on where you are, I'm in the Northwest right now. There's an ever-growing collective of people doing grief rituals. If you're a person of the majority or African heritage or BIPOC, those are all interchangeable phrases there. It's a lot harder to find grief ritual for yourself, but those are also being built more regularly and more accessible. So finding those communities online and find places to gather is priceless. But I would say that a grief ritual that does not have singing involved, I would not say it's not good anymore, but I would say it's lacking an important part of the grieving process. So I just want to name that as my recommendation for that person that says, I don't even know my grief. I don't know how to get there. I would say, find some natural items, get in your vehicle if you need to, go to nature space and practice vocalizing as loud as your body possibly can.
I know when I first did that, I was just like, holy moly, I didn't realize all that was in there. It was freaking amazing. And it is, when you do that work, when you get into that, it's almost like that vocalizing is like releasing a valve somatically. And then that's when all the, the tears come and the deep feelings. Okay. Well, you're here, so I really want to also have this conversation because so many things have happened over the last 3 years, shaping, the Black experience in America and DEI and anti-racism and all of these sorts of things. And I've had so many incredible conversations with people about this as a good old white girl from the Midwest to try and understand this experience in a way that feels really aligned and whole and spiritual. And personally, for me, I got to go when I lived in an RV for a year and traveled around the country. You probably don't know that about me. But I got to go to places in America that I'd never been, where there was a completely different Black experience than where I grew up in the Midwest. It's like my whole world popped open. And so I think that there's a whole lot of people that don't get to have that experience, or that's the only experience they know. And it's in our culture, it's in our workplace, it's in social media. And it's like, so where are we? Like, what do we need to know? How do we make the planet a better place as humans in all of this?
Well, look at racism, anti-racism, DEI work, where I swim in those waters on a regular basis is part of my job and part of my life. And right now I'm in Bellingham, Washington. There's not many Black people up here.
Right.
They're here, but not many. And I'll say a couple of things. One is particularly white people, and I'll say white people as a whole, but particularly those that have power. I would encourage them even more to work on this. And that is, I use the analogy of a sprint. I ran track in high school and some junior college. The 100-yard dash, you take off as fast as you can. In 10 seconds or so, 11 seconds, you're done. That's the end of the race. And there's a pair of shoes you wear that's physically built for sprinting.
Okay.
And if you run 800 or more or a mile, you wear a different pair of shoes. I think white people oftentimes have sprinting shoes on. When it comes to taking anti-racism, it's like, oh my God, George Floyd died or Trump got elected or whatever happened. Oh my God, on the internet all day. They're like, $70 to so-and-so and $20 to so-and-so. And they're just like, let's fix racism. And in 2 months, they're like, oh man, racism is not fixed yet, but I am tired. I think I'm gonna go back to my life. And this is, I don't know. I don't know how Black people do it. I just need a break. And they take a break until the next flashpoint, the next slow death of a Black body on the internet, or next time that, and that's kind of what most people move in this work. And so what I want to invite is all the white people that might hear this now and indefinitely is, if you happen to have your sprinting shoes on, I would like you to take them off and put on your marathon shoes. And your marathon shoes are comfortable. It's slow. It's not sexy. You don't got to post it online. It's more than putting a Black Lives Matter sign in front of your house. It's actually making your neighborhood have the capacity to see Black people when they actually physically show up, not just a sign. And what that means is that there's a tenderness to yourself that's needed. You'll get cursed out by a Black person after you just gave $50,000 to another Black organization they know nothing about, and not tell that Black person to curse you out that you did that. You just say, I am so sorry for the mistake I made. I'm not going to wield my actual reparation work to prove to you right now that I'm a good white person. I'm going to absorb this space right now for you because I didn't do that good work to prove to you. That's marathon shoes, right?
Right.
It's not about, I don't know how many organizations get shamed online and come to me because like, I'm being shamed online. And Aaron, I've done so much. I want to show you what I've done. Don't show it what you've done. Just do what you're doing. But don't show it. It would really smash this hater online. I know it would. But that's not why you gave to whatever you did. You didn't do it so you could smash the haters. You did it because it's the right thing to do, because oppression's real. That's the marathon shoes. So for me, we can talk about vocabulary. I use the word people of the global majority. That's a phrase I use instead of BIPOC. BIPOC is fine, but people of the global majority is acknowledging that non-white people are the global majority. We're not just minorities. We're not just 13%. We are the global majority. It changed the posture. I say that.
I love that.
To just slow down to white people. They're actually the minority on the planet. The damage they've caused feels like they're a majority, but the actual population-wise, they're the minority, right? And that they also, you notice what that might feel like, right? To notice if you feel like you're the majority in your region, that you've ignored the actual world you live in. That's normal for white supremacy behavior. So I would say slow down. I would say when the flashpoints come, either be another version of a death on the internet, that we don't have to raise our hands and start doing our work. Their hands are already up as high as they can, and we continue the work we were doing before the person died slowly on the internet. And that, to me, is something that if you can capture the heart and the tenderness and the unpublic version of that work, I would find it being profound. Now, there are many nuances and research and films and books. And the last thing I would say, before we even recommend any of that, because I'm not even going to recommend that, what I'm going to recommend is this thing right here. People said to me, I was a couple of weeks ago, I was doing a keynote, and someone asked me, Aaron, if you're going to just talk about one thing on anti-racism and that's it, what would it be? In the very big field of anti-racism, that was a good question, because like, what would it be? And that would be listening. I find that if I have to pick one topic, one thing that I would invite white folks to be able to do, and then people say, well, listening, I can listen. Let me explain listening. Let me explain listening. When I say listening for white folks that are interested in dismantling oppression. I remember it was at a rewilding event. I was doing an integration and rewilding event, and the guy was telling a story around the fire. They're great storytellers. He was telling this story. It was funny. We laughed. We giggled. It was funny. He sang songs. It was a great, great little story in 8 minutes. He goes, did you like that story? I said, I love that story. We all said we love that story. He said, would you listen differently if your life depended on you knowing that story? If it wasn't just entertainment. And I was like, oh, yeah, because I was receiving the story the first time it was entertainment. So I was not listening as if the next day the things he was saying in my life might depend upon it. I'd be taking notes. I'd be recording on my cell phone. I'd be thinking much differently. My posture, my body, my heart would be listening differently. And I would say to white folks, I would like you to listen as if your life and your children's life and your grandchildren's life depends upon you listening. And when you listen from that position and you have your marathon shoes on, all the films and all the books and all the things that we are also in the internet accessible will actually be effective at moving the dial in anti-racism. But that's the thing, is that in America, you can go to the best universities and go, I am excited about this Harvard, Johns Hopkins, UCLA. I would like to major in listening. Can you show me where your listening department is? They'll look at you and be like, oh, I'm so sorry. We are the best university probably in the world if you ask certain people, and we do not have a listening department. And America looks like it doesn't. So for you as a white person, you are the Harvard of listening. This is your practice. There's no help from the powers that be, because listening does dismantle a lot of these things very quickly. And so that's what I would say, and where we are as America's trying to figure out, we're going to be able to listen as if our lives depend upon it and if our children's lives depend upon it. That's where we are. We're trying to make that decision. We haven't made a decision yet. We're at the cusp of making that choice. And I'm encouraging us, if you hear my voice, let's start finding those practices. So then maybe 20 years from now, there'll be a university of listening, and it'll be the Harvard level of changing the world we live in.
Are there any countries, are there any places in the world that are doing this? Like all the things we've talked about on this show today, I feel like we've sort of been like shitting on America because we're a little baby country and we're like fucked up. And yeah, and all my travels that I've been doing, I'm just like, oh, America, you're just acting like such a toddler right now. Like you really are. Is there any place it's better? Like in terms of like that we could say like this is a model of what it could look like?
Well, I think it's here in America. Every indigenous tribe in every continent listens so much better than the civilized culture that destroyed them. I don't know how many times the native cultures have been listening to the water, listening to the trees, listening to each other, listening to the ancestors. This has been going on for hundreds of thousands of years.
Right.
This is everywhere. The examples are everywhere in this beautiful country of America. And so you don't have to look far. It's here. There are nations among us. And so I think if you are trying to go somewhere else, you don't have to. It's right here. As much as we are traumatized we actually have the answers right here. So you don't have to go far. And I would say too, you don't have to go outside of America. The animals listen so much. I mean, I remember as a kid, as the first lesson I had as a kid, I should destroy ant holes. I loved killing ants. I would take an ant hole, and the ants would get up in the morning, they go out to get their food, and I go and I get a shovel, and I would scrape their ant hole away. I would pile dirt on top of it. I would smooth it out, and I'd be amazed how an ant would crawl and find the exact spot where ant hole and start digging down. And I'm like, how did this ant know? I just destroyed this entire surface version of, if you took my house and did that to it, I wouldn't know what my house was. This ant innately knows where its ant hole is, right? They're listening. Bees, wasps, flies, cockroaches, rats, right? We spend billions of dollars getting rid of rats and cockroaches. We're never getting rid of them because they listen. So my point is that the example of listening, the energetics, the mycelium, you go Northwest and you say mushrooms or mycelium, people have orgasms in the moment. Because I get it, because mycelium, all these examples of listening are all around us, right? America is really good at being so loud in our capitalist practices that listening becomes this novelty thing. The examples are not far away. It's like touch. It's right here. It's right here. It's accessible. It's right here. So we don't have to go far. The cool thing is you don't have to leave the country. The examples are all around us, right? And folks are like, I don't even see native folks. I don't like ants. I hate cockroaches and ranchers are bad. We know who also listens really well? Children, babies. Holistic Resistance tell you all the time that children are our biggest teachers. They're the wild beings, and they hear you. They hear you. Watch how children absorb the world. Perfect example. That's the heart of listening. So those are easy examples without leaving the country.
Oh my God, you're amazing. I just want to like hang out with you and
we should.
To you. I know. I just love everything that you're saying, and I feel like you're articulating these senses or feelings or thoughts. I don't even think they're thoughts that I've had, and you just are so articulate. What do they call that? Where you take something that is like unconscious and then you're able to articulate it, like something that's innate and that you just do without being able to describe it, and then you can actually articulate it for other people to understand the depth of your genius. That's you, Aaron. Oh, like, so bless you. I'm just so happy to have you here. Ladies, I mean, just get all over Aaron Johnson. His website is cut in a healthy way. Project.org. You can find him on the IG, Instagram, cut.project. And yeah, just I want to stay connected with you. I want to know more about what you're doing. Your whole team just looks so like there's so much depth and so much power and just so much freaking smarts and wisdom. And I appreciate you giving me the honor of getting to know you, being on the show and impacting our audience. So just bless you. And if you're not watching this on YouTube, you should go, because Aaron's just got this like vibe about him. So if you think his voice is sexy, just get his vibe on YouTube and you'll just be like an Aaron fan. Which brings me to this. If you're not following us on YouTube, go to YouTube, life check yourself, and you can watch all these shows with these incredible people and subscribe. And also you can follow me on Instagram, Marni Battista _ and on Facebook, Marni Battista. But whatever you do, I mean, oh my gosh, rewind this, listen to it again. There's so many points where you can softly and gently life check yourself. We'll see you next time. Thanks for being here. Bye-bye for now. Hey, thanks for tuning into today's show. So if being in an intimate relationship in which you feel 100% seen, heard, and accepted by a high caliber man is a priority for you right now, and you're interested in seeing if you're a fit for working with me and my team at Dating with Dignity, here's what I want you to do. Just head over to DWD VIP, that's D as in dating, W, D as in dating, VIP.com, and book a call to speak with my team. We'll get on the phone with you for about 60 minutes and you'll get crystal clear on what's stopping you from finding true love right now. We'll also take a look at what you want to create, what you want your whole life to look like when you're able to finally be fully expressed as a woman in a healthy relationship with an incredible guy. And if we can help you get from where you are right now to where you want to be, we will show you the fastest path possible that makes sense for you to do that. We help smart, successful women all over the world solve this one missing piece in their life so they can finally have it all. So to see if we can help you do the same thing, head over to DWDVIP.com. I'm Marni Battista, and let's talk soon.